I knew something was wrong the moment I got the calendar invite labeled Operational Excellence Alignment. That's corporate speak for we're about to destroy your career. The coffee in the break room was still warm when Madison Walsh strolled in like she owned the place. Well, technically she did. Daddy's little princess, fresh out of whatever Ivy League business school churns out these overconfident management consultants with their buzzword vocabularies and zero real-world experience. I'm Bob Hartley, by the way. 49 years old, been keeping Blackstone Defense contractors compliant with Defense Contract Management Agency regulations for 21 years. Through budget cuts, reorganizations, acquisitions, post-9/11 security overhauls, and that nightmare year when we had to prove to auditors that our coffee machine wasn't excessive overhead under FAR 31.2014. I kept us clean. Zero findings, no flags, spotless record with DCMA, DCAA, and every other alphabet soup agency that matters in defense contracting. Madison's handshake felt like grabbing a wet fish. Too much jewelry, not enough substance. While other departments held their compliance retreats at golf resorts, I was here in the trenches, reviewing subcontractor certifications under DFARS 252.2444-7001, chasing down missing SF 328 forms, making sure every bolt and rivet met MIL spec requirements. I was the guy who translated Pentagon regulations into procedures people could actually follow without triggering a federal investigation, which is why I nearly laughed when she clicked through her presentation. Yes, a PowerPoint in our first leadership alignment session, and announced, we'll be revolutionizing compliance through an automated, efficiency-first methodology that leverages artificial intelligence to streamline our regulatory burden. I've heard enough consultant babble to know what that means. We're replacing experience with algorithms and hoping nobody notices when the Pentagon comes knocking. Madison had this smug smile after every slide, like she was revealing the secrets of the universe instead of recycling management theories from her MBA textbook. She kept using phrases like digital transformation and agile compliance frameworks, while completely ignoring the fact that federal regulations aren't suggestions you can optimize away with better software. No offense, Bob, she emphasized, but your methods are a bit too manual for our new digital transformation initiative. We're moving toward a more scalable, cloud-based approach to regulatory management. No offense. Like telling a master craftsman his tools are outdated before handing him a plastic hammer and expecting him to build a skyscraper. I didn't react, just crossed my arms and asked, "Is this a formal position change?" HR looked at me like I'd asked if submarines could fly. "It's transitional," they said. "We're exploring operational synergies and cross-functional optimization opportunities." The HR director, Patricia Crenshaw, had obviously been coached by Madison on the new corporate speak. Patricia and I had worked together for 15 years. She used to be straight-talking, practical. Now she was spouting consultant jargon like she'd been reprogrammed. Within 48 hours, my office had been reassigned to some kid named Bryce Hamilton, who wore sneakers to client meetings and thought DFARS was a type of headlight, and I'd been moved to the security checkpoint at the front entrance. "Security?" I asked. "It's strategic," Madison said with a wink. "First impressions matter for stakeholders. You'll be our facility access coordinator." Facility access coordinator. They couldn't even call it what it was. Security guard. I smiled, nodded, and pulled up my employment contract on my phone. Here's the thing about being underestimated. When you're young, it stings. But when you've got 21 years of experience and know every regulation in the book, every loophole, every requirement that can shut down a defense contractor faster than you can say material breach, it becomes fuel. From that security desk, I watched the chaos unfold like a master watching apprentices try to rebuild a watch with mittens on. Madison had replaced our in-house legal counsel with Ashley Crawford, some friend from her networking circle who called contract clauses agreement parameters and thought DCMA stood for Defense Contract Management Administration instead of agency. The first week was like watching a slow-motion car accident. Ashley tried to expedite a vendor approval by skipping the required SF 1449 solicitation process. Bryce attempted to modify our quality assurance program without understanding that it was locked in place by DCMA Approval Letter 2019 QAP 447. One of the new interns asked me if we really needed to follow all those old federal forms, or if there was a more modern way to handle cage code verification. I just smiled and handed out visitor badges. Meanwhile, I quietly maintained my compliance files, not out of obligation, but because I knew the Pentagon audit was coming. Our triennial DCMA review was scheduled for next quarter, and I knew that contract language better than I knew my own social security number. I'd written half of those procedures myself, back when people understood that federal regulations weren't suggestions. Here's the crucial part that Madison and her team of MBA wizards didn't understand. I was still listed as the primary DCMA compliance specialist on Form DD 1423, Contract Data Requirements List. You don't just reassign that title with an email and a smile. That designation is locked into the contract structure, filed with the Pentagon, and backed up by my personal DCMA certification number 47BCC9847. And my DCMA certification was due for renewal in 72 days. The certification that controlled our entire $275 million defense manufacturing contract for Navy submarine sonar components. The certification that, if it lapsed, would trigger an automatic contract suspension under DFARS 252-242-7006, Accounting System Administration. But nobody in Madison's new Agile compliance team knew that. They were too busy revolutionizing our regulatory burden to read the actual regulations. Madison called it a strategic discussion, but it felt more like a performance review conducted by someone who'd learned management from YouTube videos. I walked into the conference room at 9 o'clock sharp, not out of respect, but because I wanted to see if she'd flinch when I showed up prepared with my leather portfolio and 21 years of institutional knowledge. She didn't flinch, just gestured to the chair like she was granting me an audience, her MBA diploma prominently displayed on the wall behind her like a trophy from a participation award ceremony. "Bob," she began, fingers steepled like a discount guru, "you've been here a long time. A foundational player, really. But as we pivot toward a leaner, tech-enabled model, we're streamlining roles that are, well, let's say high certification, but low velocity." I stared, said nothing. Let her dig deeper into the hole she was creating. "We've decided to transition you into a more stakeholder-facing role. Security oversight. You'll still be interfacing with critical partners, just in a refreshed context that maximizes your client relationship experience." The woman had just demoted a federal compliance specialist to door guard and acted like she'd handed me a promotion to the executive suite. "That's a significant role shift," I said evenly. "I'll need that documented in writing, with updated job descriptions and reporting structures." Her smile faltered like a cheap light bulb. "It's more of a fluid reassignment. HR will handle the administrative logistics." I nodded slowly, pulling out my phone to make a quick note. "Great. I'll wait for the formal documentation with signature authority chains and updated contract officer designations." The mention of contract officer designations made Ashley shift uncomfortably in her chair. She probably didn't even know what that meant, but the words had a weight that penetrated even MBA-trained skulls. HR sent nothing that day, nothing the next day either. Just vague emails about interim support structures and temporary cross-functional allocation pending organizational optimization. Translation: "We're trying to demote you without legally triggering a demotion because we don't understand the federal implications of what we're doing." By the end of the week, my system access started disappearing like evidence at a crime scene. The compliance database I'd built over 2 decades, gone. My editing privileges in the contract management system that tracked our entire Pentagon relationship, revoked. I couldn't even log into the DCMA portal I'd personally configured in 2018 to handle our transition from paper-based documentation to digital compliance tracking. But here's what Madison and her team of innovation experts didn't understand about federal systems. They don't sync with corporate HR. Databases. When you revoke someone's access to internal systems, it doesn't automatically update their status with the Pentagon. Those are separate universes that only communicate through very specific, very formal channels. Meanwhile, the new operations team was turning into a walking liability festival that would have been comedy gold if it wasn't attached to a $250 million defense contract. Bryce Hamilton, Madison's hand-picked operations manager, had apparently learned everything he knew about defense contracting from a weekend seminar titled Agile Project Management for Government Relations. One morning I watched him try to expedite a critical component delivery by calling the vendor directly and asking if they could just ship it faster, without understanding that every change to our delivery schedule required a formal contract modification under FR 43.103, submitted through the DCMA portal, with impact assessments on cost, schedule, and technical performance. The vendor rep, a guy I'd worked with for 12 years, called me at the security desk that afternoon. "Bob, what the hell is going on over there?" "Some kid just asked me to ignore the delivery sequence we've had locked in place since 2019. New management," I told him. "They're optimizing our processes. By breaking federal law?" "That would be a side effect, yes." Another day, I watched Ashley try to handle a routine DCAA audit prep by printing out our financial reports and highlighting them with different colored markers. She'd apparently never heard of generally accepted accounting principles, let alone the specific DCAA requirements under CS 401 that govern how defense contractors track and report costs. When the DCAA preliminary reviewer arrived for our quarterly check, Ashley actually handed him a binder with a tab labeled "Our Numbers" that contained printed Excel spreadsheets with handwritten notes in the margins. The auditor, a no-nonsense guy named Williams who'd been reviewing our books for 8 years, just stared at the binder like she'd handed him a crayon drawing. "Where's your CAS-compliant cost accounting system documentation?" he asked. Ashley blinked. "Our what now?" I was sitting 20 feet away at the security desk, pretending to review visitor logs while watching Williams realize that he was looking at someone who had no idea what she was doing. He glanced over at me, recognition flickering in his eyes, then back at Ashley. "I need to speak with your primary accounting system administrator," he said carefully. "That's me," Ashley said brightly. "I'm handling all our financial interface optimization." Williams looked like a man who'd just discovered his parachute was actually a backpack. "Ma'am, this is a federal audit under Public Law 91-379. I need someone who understands cost accounting standards compliance." That's when Bryce jumped in, trying to save the situation with pure enthusiasm. "We've revolutionized our accounting with a cloud-based solution that automates compliance through artificial intelligence." Williams, who'd been auditing defense contractors since before the internet existed, just closed his notebook. "I'll be back when you have qualified personnel available." After he left, I watched Ashley and Bryce huddle in the conference room, frantically Googling CAS compliance and DCAA audit requirements like they were cramming for a final exam they'd forgotten about. These were the people now managing our $275 million defense manufacturing pipeline, a contract that built sonar components for the Navy's Virginia-class submarine program. Components that, if they failed quality standards, could compromise national security. Components that were governed by more regulations than most people read in a lifetime. I sat at that security desk, smiled when they stumbled past with their color-coded binders and panic Googling sessions, and started carrying a small notebook, not for show, for documentation. Day 3. Database access revoked. Legal sites operational restructuring. Day 6. Ashley drafts memo listing me as facility support staff. Day 8. Still no formal title change. DCMA renewal notice arrives in my personal email. Day 12. Bryce attempts to modify QAP without DCMA approval authority. Day 15. Ashley submits financial documents to DCAA without CAS compliance verification. It was like watching a train derailment in slow motion, except I knew exactly when the tracks had been sabotaged, by whom, and how many regulations they'd broken in the process. They thought I was irrelevant now. Background noise. A relic from the old way of doing things. But every mistake they made pointed back to one immutable fact that was locked into our contract structure like a steel beam in a foundation. My name was still on Form DD 1423 as the primary DCMA compliance specialist. And the Pentagon doesn't care about your PowerPoint slides or your digital transformation initiatives. They care about who holds the certification that keeps their submarines running. The beautiful part? I didn't need to sabotage anything. They were doing it for me, one regulatory violation at a time. The security desk gave me front row seats to watch everything I'd spent 21 years building get dismantled by people who couldn't tell a defense specification from a grocery list, and the view kept getting better. Madison's new team had set up shop in the main conference room, which they'd renamed the Innovation Hub, complete with a whiteboard covered in buzzwords like synergy, optimization, and scalable solutions. Every day, waves of interns and junior analysts stumbled past me, clutching compliance binders upside down, asking questions that made my teeth hurt. "Do we still need to follow all those old federal forms?" one intern asked me while waiting for his visitor badge. "What's DFARS again?" asked another. My personal favorite came from a consultant Madison had hired for $200 an hour. "Can't we just use the regular accounting rules instead of these weird government ones?" I just smiled and handed out badges. No point explaining that those weird government ones were the cost accounting standards that kept defense contractors from going to federal prison. One particularly nervous engineer leaned close while signing the visitor log and whispered, "They don't even know what DCMA certification means," like he was confessing state secrets. "Interesting," I said, making a note in my little book. The thing about being removed from authority is that everyone forgets you ever had it. They think you've been erased from the system like an old backup file. But federal databases don't forget like corporate org charts do. They're persistent, methodical, and completely indifferent to your organizational restructuring. I still had my login credentials for the DCMA compliance portal. They'd never been revoked because officially nothing had changed in the federal system. So on a quiet Tuesday morning, while pretending to monitor the visitor log and update facility access records, I logged in to check our contract status. There it was, clear as day, Robert Hartley, Primary DCMA Compliance Specialist, active on Contract 47B8829, status, current, next renewal, due 28 days. I clicked through to the Certification Renewal tab. My DCMA certification number 47BCC9847 was set to expire in exactly 28 days. The same certification that controlled our entire $275 million defense manufacturing contract for Navy submarine sonar components under DFARS 252.242-7006. That's when it clicked. Not a trap I had to build. The trap already existed, written into the contract language during the last Pentagon update cycle in 2019. Section 47.3.2 clearly stated that all active defense contractors must maintain a current DCMA certified compliance specialist with active security clearance, or the entire contract becomes subject to immediate suspension pending federal review. And there was only one name in that clause: mine. I hovered my cursor over the renewal button. It would have taken 30 seconds. A few clicks, a payment authorization of $450. A digital signature confirmation. Back to business as usual for Madison's band of amateur regulators. Instead, I minimized the window and leaned back in my chair. The office around me buzzed with artificial urgency that reminded me of ants rebuilding after someone kicked their hill. Printouts scattered in the wrong order. Interns sprinting between floors with coffee orders. Consultants whispering in corners about compliance frameworks and regulatory optimization strategies. Madison was busy prepping for her big compliance presentation like she was about to pitch a startup on Shark Tank. I overheard her telling Ashley she wanted to dazzle the Pentagon with our streamlined narrative and forward-thinking approach to regulatory management. Her version of audit prep was printing PowerPoints in full color and wearing a power blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She even called a team meeting, where she made everyone chant audit ready like some corporate cult ritual. Nobody noticed I was quietly printing personal copies of the contract specifications and federal requirements documentation. Nobody asked why I was suddenly tracking edit histories and timestamp logs in my notebook. The office was crawling with consultants now, glossy types in expensive suits clicking around on MacBooks, saying things like, "Let's gamify the compliance matrix," and "We're revolutionizing the audit experience through data storytelling and visual analytics." I watched one of them try to convert our vendor certification database into an infographic using Canva and present it to legal like he'd discovered fire. Ashley actually clapped. Meanwhile, the actual documentation looked like it had been hit by a hurricane. My formerly bulletproof compliance files were now rebranded as DCMA Engagement Assets and Contract Journey Maps. They'd added a section called Our Innovation Values that included a quote from Madison: "Compliance is just creativity within boundaries." That one made me write down the exact timestamp. 28 days became 25, then 20. Each one ticked by like a countdown timer that only I could hear. Every morning I'd check the Pentagon portal. Every evening I'd update my notebook with another day's worth of regulatory violations and procedural shortcuts. Day 19. Bryce approves vendor modification without SF-30 contract amendment. Day 17. Ashley submits cost report missing required CAS 406 disclosure statement. Day 15. New intern attempts to expedite security clearance verification outside established JPS protocol. Then I got the message that changed everything. A simple email from Colonel Peterson, the Pentagon audit liaison I'd worked with for years. Professional, direct, no wasted words. Confirming you'll be present for the triennial DCMA compliance assessment scheduled for next month. Please acknowledge receipt. He wasn't asking out of courtesy. He was confirming what the federal system told him. I was still the primary compliance specialist on record. I was the face he expected to see across that table, the voice that would explain our procedures, the signature that validated our entire operation. I stared at the email for a long moment, watching the cursor blink in the reply field. Through the lobby windows, I could see Madison in the conference room, gesturing enthusiastically at a whiteboard while her team of consultants nodded like bobblehead dolls. I typed back, "I'll be present, nothing more. No explanations, no context. Just confirmation." I closed the message and returned to my visitor logs, but inside I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: anticipation. Let them rehearse their presentations and string together buzzwords like Christmas lights. Let them build their house of laminated cards and good intentions. I wasn't lifting a finger to stop them because federal audits aren't impressed by innovation workshops and synergy metrics. They want certifications, documentation, and people who understand that national defense isn't a startup experiment. Madison strutted around like she'd reinvented manufacturing while her team fumbled through procedures I could recite in my sleep. One morning, I overheard Ashley asking someone if retroactive compliance was a real thing, like she could somehow go back in time and fix their regulatory violations with better intentions. It's not. And the Pentagon takes that kind of creative thinking very personally. The day before the audit hit like a freight train carrying bad news, I showed up an hour early, wearing the same navy blazer I'd worn to every Pentagon review for the past decade. The one with the faint coffee stain on the inside hem that reminded me of the 2018 audit when we'd pulled an all-nighter to fix a subcontractor certification issue. But instead of heading upstairs to conference room B where I belonged, I took my place at the security desk. The office buzzed with artificial urgency that smelled like desperation wearing expensive cologne. Consultants swarmed like bees around a broken hive. Madison floated through with her double espresso and practiced smile, telling everyone, "Today's just a formality, team. We're going to show them what modern compliance looks like." Modern compliance. Like the Pentagon was going to be impressed by their Canva infographics and agile methodologies. The first badge I issued was to Colonel Peterson. We'd worked together for years, quiet, efficient, all business. He met my eyes, nodded once, and accepted his visitor pass without comment. But I saw the flicker of recognition, the slight confusion about why I was handing him a security badge instead of sitting across from him at the conference table. Madison swept past on her way to the elevator, laptop clutched like a shield against reality. "You can sit this one out, Bob," she said without slowing. "We've got this handled." I gave her a professional smile. "I'm sure you do." Then I watched the elevator close and settled in to wait for the show to begin. The next 20 minutes moved like honey in winter. I could hear muffled voices from upstairs, occasional laughter, the squeak of markers on whiteboards. Standard audit theater, the calm before someone realizes they're standing in a minefield. Then the air changed. Not loud, not dramatic, just a shift, like atmospheric pressure dropping before a storm hits. The elevator dinged. Bryce stepped out, pale as printer paper and moving like his legs had forgotten how to work properly. He walked past me without looking, clutching his binder like a life preserver on a sinking ship. Behind him, slower, came Colonel Peterson. His face was unreadable, but I recognized that expression. It was the look of a man who'd just opened a file expecting routine paperwork and found a disaster instead. More footsteps followed. Madison, Ashley, one of the consultants looking like she might need a trash can. Nobody spoke. They moved like chess. Pieces suddenly aware the game was played in a language they didn't understand. Madison's usual confidence had evaporated like morning mist. She walked past me without the performance, her designer blazer suddenly looking like a costume that no longer fit. Finally, I heard Peterson's voice from the conference room. Not angry, not loud, just decisive. The voice of someone delivering news that couldn't be appealed or negotiated. Primary DCMA Specialist, Robert Hartley, he read aloud, voice carrying down the hallway like a judgment. I couldn't see their faces, but I felt it. The collective realization, the simultaneous stomach drop of people who'd just discovered they were standing on a frozen lake and heard the first crack. Madison tried to speak. I heard the sharp intake of breath, the beginning of, "Actually, we've implemented a new..." Peterson held up one hand. Simple, quiet, final. His certification expired 72 hours ago. He is the only authorized DCMA specialist on this contract. A pause that seemed to last forever. As of this moment, your $275 million defense manufacturing contract is suspended pending immediate compliance review. Boom. Everything stopped. Not just the room upstairs, but something inside me. Like an engine finally cutting out after running on fumes for months, settling into the silence it was meant to have. Then came the chaos. Legal tearing through binders like answers might materialize from thin air. Bryce dropping his laptop bag. One of the consultants actually saying, "Can we just update the database real quick?" Like the Pentagon was running on Microsoft Excel. I heard Peterson mutter, "This is a federal compliance system, not a Google sheet." That's when the founder's voice exploded through the speakerphone from whatever resort he'd been hiding on. "What do you mean, suspended? We just passed review last year. Madison, what the hell is this?" Madison stammered something about operational transitions and tried to throw around the word provisional like it was a magic spell that could undo federal regulations. But it was too late. The dam had cracked, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put their compliance program back together again. That's when I stood up. I'd been watching the elevator numbers blink like a countdown timer, and now it was time for the final act. I smoothed my blazer, tucked my notebook under my arm, and walked down the hall toward the sound of everything falling apart. I could feel the change as I approached the room, like walking into the aftermath of an explosion where the smoke hadn't cleared yet. I stepped through the door without announcement. Every eye turned to me. Madison looked like she'd seen a ghost that had come back to collect on old debts. I walked past her, past Ashley with her color-coded binders, past the spinning consultants with their worthless buzzwords, right up to Peterson's table. "Colonel Peterson," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Thank you for your time today." He nodded once. "Mr. Hartley." I pulled a single envelope from my notebook, the resignation letter I'd written 3 weeks ago and carried every day since. "This is my formal resignation from Blackstone Defense Contractors, effective immediately." Madison's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I turned to Ashley. "I've retained copies of all correspondence documenting my removal from active duties and revocation of system access. If you need me to testify regarding the timeline and regulatory violations, I'll be available by subpoena only." Dead silence. Even the founder on speakerphone said nothing. I walked to the door, turned back once, and allowed myself the smallest professional smile. The kind reserved for a job well done. "I hope your new approach works out." Then I left, not stormed out, not slammed doors. Left. Because after midnight, there wouldn't be an office to return to anyway. By 11:30 that night, every light in the Blackstone building had gone dark. Federal lockdown protocols triggered the moment Peterson's report hit the Pentagon system. Email servers frozen, contracts sealed in digital quarantine, every access badge deactivated. The $275 million pipeline Madison had treated like a PowerPoint slide was now a federally controlled crime scene. Someone from the Inspector General's office had flagged the compliance failure within hours. With my name stamped on every authorization that mattered, the system did exactly what it was designed to do: shut everything down before amateurs could compromise national security. The building stood empty, dark, like the skeleton of a company that had forgotten how to breathe. By morning, the founder's jet had landed unscheduled. Madison didn't make it to lunch. Security escorted her out with a single box and a legal envelope thicker than her MBA diploma. The operations team was suspended pending federal investigation. The consultants evaporated like morning mist. Me? I wasn't there for any of it. I was 4 blocks away at Murphy's Tavern, nursing a bourbon and watching the evening news through the window. The kind of place with no TV volume, no music, just the soft clink of glass and the occasional war story from guys who'd seen enough to know when to keep quiet. My phone buzzed. Once, then again. 2 recruiters, one from Lockheed Martin, another from General Dynamics. Both messages were variations on the same theme. We've been following your work. Let's talk. A third message came from Colonel Peterson. When you're ready to get back to real work, call me. I set the phone down, didn't answer. Not yet. The bartender walked by, glanced at my empty glass. Another? I nodded. Yeah, one more. He poured without questions. Good bartender. Outside, street lights painted long shadows on the sidewalk. A couple walked by, laughing about something that mattered to them. Somewhere down the block, a siren wailed and faded into the distance. I raised my glass to the window and said to nobody in particular, 21. Years of keeping them legal, and they thought they could replace that with an app. Because in the end, they'd built their revolution on assumptions and buzzwords, and I'd just let physics take its course. No sabotage, no schemes, no revenge plots. Just 21 years of knowing exactly which thread to pull when someone hands you the scissors. Sometimes the best way to win is to simply stop playing by rules that were rigged from the start. And sometimes justice looks like a federal compliance officer who knows when to renew his certification and when to let it expire at exactly the right moment. The Pentagon doesn't negotiate, but it does appreciate precision.